complicated, and there's so many parts to this puzzle that a lot of people don't know. So we felt like this would be a great opportunity to kind of get an overview. You'll definitely be left with a few questions, but hopefully this will give you a good sense of what school meals are in North Carolina, how the programs are run, and what we need to do to make sure that all kids are receiving healthy school meals while they're at school. So Marianne, thank you so much. You're so good at explaining school meals, and I'm really looking forward to your primer, your 101.
Well, let's see how it goes. I have to tell you, Katie, when I was thinking about this earlier today, I thought if this was like a 301 or God forbid a 601, they're so complicated, I might not actually be able to do it. So 101 is kind of at the level that I think I'm comfortable with, and I hope everyone will find it really valuable.
I know that they will. I know that I have learned so much from you about school meals, and there's so much more to it. So let's jump in then.
So school nutrition programs offer food and nutrition assistance to children. They're federal programs, they're federally assisted, but they're administered locally by school food authorities. In North Carolina, all public system schools have to participate in the National School Lunch Program. Participating in the National School Breakfast Program is considered like as feasible, although I've never really run into one that doesn't. Maybe some early colleges or schools that are a little unconventional might not. And charter schools can opt in or choose not to, and about a third do. We're also the largest school nutrition program in the country. We feed a lot of kids every single day in North Carolina.
So I feel like that is a great statistic, but I sort of don't understand it, Marianne, how I don't feel like we're the 7th largest state in the country, or that we're the 7th largest, or our population is the 7th largest. So do you know what accounts for?
So population wise, I think we're around 12, although I'm going to literally check this right now. But North Carolina has always had really, really robust child nutrition programs. We've been ahead of the curve on things like standards for a la carte items, also known as competitive food items.
Well, that's good to know, but being in the top 10 is wonderful. I hope we don't slip below that.
All right, the US states ranked by population, we are 9th. So we're a little ahead, but not as far ahead in terms of child nutrition programs as you would think if we were like 12th or 15th.
Gotcha.
So good for us though. We are a quick growing and healthy and robust state. So here are some of the programs that make up the overall child nutrition programs. We have the National School Lunch Program, which serves lunches, as you might guess. The School Breakfast Program, breakfast. The Summer Food Service Program, and that reimburses operators for offering free meals and snacks to children 0 to 18 in low-income areas over the summer. You might see those at summer camps, like at the Boys and Girls Club or organizations like that in really targeted areas. And then there's what's called the Seamless Summer option. And we've heard a lot about that this year because it's the waiver that allowed the Seamless Summer option to go year round and to be applied kind of universally. That's allowed what has kind of mimicked a universal meal program over the last couple of years in schools. And that reimburses schools participating in the National School Lunch or Breakfast Program for free meals and snacks for all children 0 to 18 over the summer or during COVID year round. And the meals are reimbursed at the free rate.
What other programs are available besides the ones that you see at school or over the summer?
So we have a couple more. We have the Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP, and those are usually administered at child care centers, daycare homes, and adult daycare centers. There's the After School Snack Program, although that's back at school. the special milk program, and that works for children in schools, childcare institutions, camps that don't participate in the other meal programs. And then the last one is a school program as well, but it's a less common one. And that is the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. And that is a USDA program that provides a fresh fruit or vegetable snack at elementary schools that have applied and been accepted during the school day. It has a lot of nutrition education, and how it's administered really varies from school to school. And it's really up to the child nutrition programs themselves, the school nutrition programs, to decide, what does this look like? Do we want to expose the children at our school to a lot of different fruits and vegetables? Or do we want to choose maybe ones that are less expensive and make sure we have one for every day of the week versus just a couple days of the week? It really ranges across the gamut at schools, and it's really a fabulous program.
Well, that sounds like a fabulous program, but I also want to take 1 second just to mention that nutrition education falls under the standard course of study for, I'm pretty sure, about every grade, every elementary grade in some form or fashion. So it's great to see that some of these programs can kind of support the standard course of study.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we don't talk about a lot, but maybe we should talk about more, is the fact that because child nutrition workers are so overextended, they're understaffed, and the meal times are so tight and short, we're not really able to fully take advantage of how the cafeteria could support the standard course of study.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there for sure.
So I think most people have heard of the free and reduced price meals, and those are meals that are subsidized to account for the economic need of families. And there's a few different ways that eligibility can be determined. The first is the one that most of us know, which is when a household fills out an application and that's approved at the public school level. Another way is through direct certification. And that is where a school nutrition program looks at the number of children that are eligible for SNAP or WIC in a school. And right now, North Carolina is one of the pilot sites to pilot direct certification through Medicaid eligibility, which is huge because in North Carolina, a large portion of our childbirths, I believe a majority, are covered by Medicaid. And so we know a lot of children rely on Medicaid. And so hopefully that direct certification will make even more children eligible without the burdensome onus of the paperwork that is difficult for families sometimes, and also definitely an administrative burden for school nutrition programs. Another way that you can be determined eligible is through what's called categorical eligibility. And there are certain categories of people that are automatically eligible for that. If a child is in foster care, they are automatically, categorically eligible to receive free meals, regardless of the income of their family of origin or the income of the family they're staying with. They are absolutely just eligible, period. Homeless children, migrant labor family children, as well as children that are in Head Start. And then finally, if a school participates in the community eligibility provision. And all students right now, as we've mentioned before, can receive meals free of charge through the end of the school year, and that's through the waiver.
And I know that so many families have really come to rely on those school meals in the last 2 years.
Katie, I mean, I think we're fortunate as a family that I don't feel like we rely on it, but I definitely, maybe rely is a good word. My children have never, 3 of them have never gone to a school where a universal meal program wasn't available because of the waivers. And so they've become accustomed to going to the cafeteria, getting their lunch in particular, sometimes breakfast. More kids are eating them than ever at their school. And so a lot of kids are doing that. And I think they're really critical to my children. I think they make them less picky eaters. I think it gives a wider range of things than I might expose them to at home. And it's a huge cost savings to our family.
You know, there's so many families who are now feeling the big pinch of inflation, higher grocery costs, higher gas costs. This is just one thing that can come off of their plate, which is so important. You know, you never know what's happening in someone's house. So I love the waiver, and it would be great if the waiver were extended, but it'd be great if North Carolina could support, healthy school meals for all, regardless of what happens with the waiver.
Absolutely. And certainly while I think everyone knows I'm a believer in healthy school meals for all, but it definitely if it came at the state level, there would be a price to be paid for that. And that would be that a lot of those administrative burdens and the red tape wouldn't be lifted. We would still have to figure out this application. We would still have to do direct certification to make sure that the reimbursements are right from the federal level. And so I think it presents challenges at the state level, although certainly worth doing. Although I think the gold standard would be to really have this done mostly at the federal level, really streamline the program, clean it up, and make it easier for our school nutrition programs to implement.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I will tell you right now, I don't care if it's my federal taxes or state taxes. Please use them to feed children.
I also do not care. I will take either. I would even take it if some counties were doing it more of that.
Yep.
But the more children impacted by it, the better in my mind.
Agreed.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the community eligibility provision. The community eligibility provision got started 5-6 years ago now, so we have a good number of years looking at it. And that allows schools located in high poverty areas to provide universal free breakfast and lunch. They use what's called the identified student percentage to calculate whether or not a school is eligible. And if the identified student percentage is 40% or higher, which equals about 65-70% free reduced lunch, then the school is eligible to participate in CEP. But a lot of schools don't participate because it's just too expensive. That 40% assumes that kind of everyone would participate that's eligible to. And because the meals are reimbursed at either the free rate or the paid rate, depending on the ISP, if essentially 100% of the eligible kids don't participate, if you're in one of those marginal schools, it's really difficult. We saw in the proposal for Build Back Better that lowering the ISP to 30% was part of that bill. That was one of the provisions. And while, of course, expanding CEP is great, without getting that participation up and without substantially increasing the reimbursements for both paid and for free, the math still won't work for a lot of schools. And so I think we have to be really critical about how CEP is implemented and how we can make sure it has the best impact and the most impact it can have.
Yeah, we definitely do not want that burden falling on the schools. And the school.
No, and we have seen schools where, really whole districts where they have started using CEP and they couldn't make the math work. And after at least one district had to pay out over $250,000 to keep their school nutrition program afloat. And after that, they pulled out of it. And that's really difficult. I think it's really unpleasant. I also think it's worth noting here that we're talking about 65 to 70% of students eligible for free reduced price meals. Our whole state is 60%. So we're really not that far from coming up with something feasible for our state. So how's the program administered? It's a USDA program through Food and Nutrition Services, and the guidelines, regulations, and standards are unbelievably extensive, hundreds of pages long. There are nutrition standards called the meal pattern, and while it says what you think it says, a main dish, a vegetable, a fruit, a milk, things like that, it says way more than that. If you have to serve a certain number of leafy greens in a week. You have to serve a certain number of red and yellows, of starchy vegetables. It's just incredibly detailed. It also outlines meal times. It requires congregate feeding, which was really a challenge during the pandemic. And one of the really smart waivers lifted that need. Whether or not meals can be picked up, who is eligible, and what the reimbursement rates are. And then the waivers we've talked about is a request usually done at the state level that allows specific flexibilities in the meal pattern, the distribution, or another regulated aspect.
So these waivers made a huge difference during the pandemic, obviously.
Yeah, you saw in North Carolina, North Carolina has seamless summer option during summer meals every year. And it's a really great program, but participation in the summer is in a good year, maybe 12, 13, 14%. And when we started using the seamless summer option at the beginning of the pandemic, you saw a significant increase in the number of meals served compared to a normal summertime. Now, granted, it was a school year, and so parents weren't really anticipating paying for, their kids being home and those things. However, probably a good part of that was also due to the waiver that allowed pickup, and the parents were able to pick up, which normally, if the seamless summer option has a waiver that allows pickup, the child has to be present. And so a parent can't just leave their kids with their other parent and pick up, in our case, 6 meals for our children. It would have to be all the kids in the car. And that's a deal breaker for some families.
Yep.
It's a deal breaker for me.
So can we talk a little bit about how all of these programs are funded?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So federal funding, of course, there's federal funding for like the staff and support and all those things at the federal level. We have an entire food nutrition services department that works on that. And then for schools, they are funded on a per meal served basis. So say you have 200 kids that normally eat a meal, and for some reason today you only have 150. Even if you prepared a meal for 200 kids, you're only going to be reimbursed for those 150 meals. So that's the first thing. Our state also provides a reimbursement for, first of all, the school breakfast reduced price meal copay, which is just a tiny chunk, but it makes a big difference. It means that there's only free and paid breakfast in a normal year. A couple of years ago, our General Assembly, and what I think was great wisdom, added the reduced priced lunch copay to that as well. And then pretty promptly the pandemic happened. So we haven't actually seen how that looks, but it means that there's only free and paid in North Carolina. And anyone who would be free or reduced is just all free. That's a great savings to families. They make just really too little to think about, adding these copays up. And then they also get funding from what families pay. So they get funding from paid lunches, from a la carte competitive food items, and they also get funding on occasion. A couple of districts, 1 or 2, gets funding in advance from their county.
So if I had a child who didn't qualify for reduced lunch or free lunch, so they're paying, and then maybe on Fridays I let them get, I don't know, an ice cream. So what I'm paying for the ice cream is part of that local funding. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, that's part of the funding that kind of is generated locally. And that's kind of exactly what we do. My kids get lunch every day. And during a paid time, that's $2.65 a meal. That is likely to go up next year, given the challenges we're seeing with food costs. Keep in mind that pre-pandemic in North Carolina, a school meal cost $3.60-something. Now it's costing $5.60-something. There's absolutely no way that school districts aren't going to have to consider raising the cost of those paid meals. And as you start raising the cost of those paid meals, the value proposition for families starts becoming more questionable. At $2.50, $2.65, I can guarantee that the time savings to me and the meal that is provided is better than what I would do. If we get up to $3, maybe we start looking different, especially because I have, a lot of kids. That might not apply to a family with 1 or 2 children. They might look at that value proposition a little bit differently. And the fact that we're looking at it as a value proposition is maybe an issue, because we don't consider whether or not the school library books, whether is that a value proposition. We don't do that. The kids just get to take a book home, bring it back. We don't even have late fees. We don't consider the value proposition of the playground equipment. We consider whether or not it meets the school's needs and whether or not it meets the children's needs, and everyone plays on it for the same no cost. So I think the fact that I think of it that way is problematic, for how we have framed child nutrition in this country.
And Marian, we don't look at income when we decide who gets to drive the school bus either.
No, we don't. The
it's
state
hard on
provides
us.
a base rate for every student, whether they ride the school bus or whether or not they walk to school, or whether or not they're sent in carpool. And then it's really up to the district to make sure every child can safely get to school, and use those funds as needed to do that. And that's another area where we're looking at understaffing, and some real challenges in operations. So at the federal level, child nutrition reauthorization is done every 5 years, but we're 7 years late. The last one was the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, and that was done in 2010. It required local wellness policies, which I'm a big fan of. It implemented stricter nutrition standards for school meals, but it expired in 2015 and we haven't re-upped. We're hoping to see that this summer at the federal level. And it's a great time to be talking about universal meals, no matter what, expanding access to meals, making sure that those reimbursements keep up with the cost of food. All of that's going to be really critical this year. So we've talked a little bit about this, Katie, as we were talking about kind of where these funds come from. So as I said, my kids get lunch, and then 1 day a week they get an a la carte item. So in a normal year, I have 4 kids in school right now. If they are paying for their lunches and they're paying for their a la carte item, they always choose ice cream. That's about $1. And then the meals currently, if we were paying, are $2.65. So we're looking at $10.60 a day, which is $53 a week. And then if they each get an ice cream, that's $57 a week. That's a huge chunk. And what I like to make sure people think about is the fact that that's 5 meals a day. That's not really a bad price or 5 meals a week, but that's not even half the lunches of the week. So it's a huge chunk of a food budget to be paying for this. And that's why we'll be thinking about like the value of it as it moves forward. And I want my kids to be eating school lunches. I think they're an important part of the social day, and I think they're good for kids.
Oh, I 100% agree. There's no way I'm packing a lunch that's as healthy as what they get at school. There's just no way.
I think my kids are better eaters since they eat school meals. So one thing to note is that the biggest cost of school meals is salaries and benefits. Those are mandated by the legislature, certain levels of benefits and pay, and absolutely no issue with the rate of pay. I think they should be well paid, and they should get benefits for their work. However, that leaves only $1 left for food. And a lot of the cost, and now of course that cost of food is going up. And so when you're trying to control the cost of a school meal, there's really only 2 ways you can do that. And that's food costs or labor costs. And so either you cut workers and you try to use more food that's kind of partially prepared, or you try to find less expensive food items. And really, we're at the point where it just doesn't work anymore. $5.67 for the reimbursements just doesn't work. And here's what the reimbursements look like. So this is where you can really see the challenges. So if we're on $5.67 for a school lunch, and the reimbursement is $4.15 for the seamless summer option right now, they're still going $1.50 into the hole every single meal. And then if we're looking at the paid rate, the paid reimbursement is 41 cents. during the last school year where we had this, I paid $2.65, and that still didn't equal what the meal was costing the school district to provide. So that's where we see the numbers just don't work anymore.
But before, Mary Ann, before the pandemic and before these waivers, do you know when was the last time that they increased the amount?
It usually goes up every year or so.
Okay.
You'll see that between 2018 and 2019, it went from 214 to 220 for breakfast, for example. It went from 339 to 350. But that's, first of all, it doesn't keep up with the rate of inflation and the rate of labor, especially nowadays. And they were underfunded to begin with. So increasing it by 6 cents, 11 cents, 12 cents when it wasn't enough money, that's a real problem. And it hasn't been enough money since the 1980s. So it's not our current legislators or congressmen or anyone who created this problem, unless they were there in the 80s, which I guess some of them were. But they cut funding to child nutrition programs back in the 80s, and they've been underfunded since then. Until 2010, they were able to kind of keep it going without a lot of problems, because first of all, there were weaker child nutrition standards at the time. So if you remember, like the real tasty sheet cakes that you might have seen go through your cafeteria in the 90s, if you remember the Domino's pizza and being able to go the a la carte item, like a la carte aisle and get like real donuts, that's because child nutrition standards were weaker then. So they were able to keep afloat on the back of these a la carte competitive food sales. In North Carolina, those equaled tens and tens and tens of millions. Someone told me once it was well over 100 million in the early 2000s when these standards were changed to create tighter standards for those items. And so in 2010, when the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act passed, that included smart snack standards. And so on top of the already stricter North Carolina standards, that put in place way stricter federal standards. And the a la carte item sales just plummeted. And they no longer could make the money work. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
or did I go into
does.
A way bigger question?
No, that does answer my question. And I think that like some historical context is always really good for people when they're trying to wrap their brains around school meals and the complexity of it all.
Well, if we like historical context, I'm a bit of a history buff, and I have some of this kind of stored away. Some of the first hot lunch programs in the state were started, in the country, were started by parent-teacher associations, particularly in like industrial cities in the northern part of the country, where they started, moms and dads would kind of get together and start preparing these meals for kids that maybe were the first that had ever been going to school. And, you know, at the time, I think everyone was kind of just glad they were no longer in factories. And then we really started seeing the implementation of the federal program during the Depression and then during World War II. During the Depression, it was used as a way to kind of buy up excess food and keep farms afloat. And then following that, there became a real issue when the draft was implemented during World War II, and that a large number of men were not eligible to serve because of malnutrition. And so it was implemented as a program really for our national defense and less for the health and academic success of children. Over the years, we've seen that it improves the health of children, it improves their academic outcomes, it improves discipline and attendance. We've seen that it does all these things as well, but it was really designed as a strategy for our national defense.
That is very interesting.
And as one of the largest military states, important for us to note that. So the cost to produce a meal. Way back in 2019, which feels a really long time ago now, 30% of districts were in debt because the cost of producing meals exceeded the rate of reimbursement. We're talking labor, we're talking the food, we're talking the professional development, the software needed. If your child goes in and enters a number instead of having to like hand cash over, that technology has to be paid for. If you go in and you put money into your kid's account, I put money in my kid's account. I do that on a website that has to be paid for. And then of course, all the commercial preparation and equipment. Back in 2019, 2020, there was also indirect costs, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then in the same school year, 14% of districts had negative operating balances and 18% had less than 1 month's operating balance in their school nutrition account. And you can see the cost of those meals ticking up. So between 2018 and 2019, you'll see that the cost of a meal went up 15. But if I scroll back real quick to the reimbursement rate for lunch, you're going to see that the increase in the reimbursement rate for a free meal, that only went up 11 cents.
Wow.
So every single year, it was already falling behind. So let's talk a little bit more, particularly about indirect costs, and let's talk a little bit about the cap on the operating balances. So the indirect costs are something that really every federal program pays to school districts. However, most of them are capped at the federal level, 4 or 5%. So Title I programs like that are all capped. Child nutrition somehow did not have a cap. In North Carolina, it had kind of been informally capped at, 15, 16%. So school districts weren't taking more than that. But school districts could take that. The minute the school nutrition programs were in the black, they could take those indirect costs. That cap was lowered in the last budget, and we won't know exactly how much more money that offers to school districts quite yet, or to school nutrition programs quite yet. But when we were looking at estimates, we were looking at $20 to $30 million a year back in the pockets of child nutrition programs so they can do the work that they are mandated to do. Another challenge was that they were only allowed to have 1 month's operating reserve in their bank accounts. The challenge with that is that, as we saw with the pandemic, it doesn't give them any ability to pivot, to course correct, to solve the problems that they're facing. So that recently was raised to 2 months, Katie, am I correct?
I think you're right, yep.
Yep. 3 months would be better. 2 months is better though. But there's still things that need to be done. Certainly we need the wages and benefits, particularly the mandated increases to those really need to be covered at the state level. They're state employees, the state should make sure we have the funds for those. They need general support in order to buy the equipment they need, the professional development they need. And then certainly we need to look at things like farm to school. It's a great opportunity for our local farmers to be able to invest in school meal programs, but it's not free to participate. Farmers who sell their goods to schools in North Carolina have to be GAP certified. They have to be able to produce certain things that are needed at certain times. And so certainly some more support for farm to school is really critical. And then COVID-19 continues to be an issue for schools. They are using more one-use and disposable items to avoid a lot of contact and touching of things. And that's really, really very important that is able to continue. So those are things that are really important. I think ultimately it's no secret that our goal on the part of the North Carolina Alliance for Health is healthy school meals for all. It's the most efficient, it's the most fair system for kids. And all of these things help get us just a little bit closer toward making sure every child is able to eat a healthy meal at school. Any final questions or thoughts, Katie?
I think that one thing that, even though we have talked about school meals so many times, there's one thing that just kind of blows my mind is that they're only reimbursed for the actual meals served. Like, this must be incredibly hard for the school nutrition staff to decide how much to cook each day. And I just I don't even know what to, their hands are tied. So they need enough food to feed everybody, right?
Right. But they don't need too much food, because then there's food waste. And food waste is a big concern that I think a lot of people share. I will say that in the last budget at the General Assembly, they did appropriate funds for a program at NC State to really clarify the rules around repurposing unserved prepared foods. So hopefully that will open the door to really reducing waste, and it doesn't help really the finances of the school district and of the school nutrition program in particular. They really have to just get as close as they can to the number, right?
Right.
So it doesn't really help them financially. However, certainly I think reducing waste is something that everyone agrees is a good thing.
And Marianne, I just want to thank you so much for doing a great job of explaining this. There's so many things that are hard to understand about school meals. I think that overall people do think that children should be fed, and they should be fed food that's good for them and nutritious. And hopefully soon it'll be, one of those things where it's just thought of as a regular part of the day, just like riding the bus, going to the library, doing everything at school. It's just a regular part of the school day and needs to be funded, and make it easier for not just, parents, but staff, and take some burden off of the staff and families that rely on these school meals.
Certainly that would be my dream. And before we cut off, I would be, I cannot forget to thank Rachel Finley, who is a longtime partner of ours, who always has really the patience of Job, explaining things about child nutrition to us and making sure that we're really kind of thoughtful and we know what we're talking about, and clarifying points for us. She's a former child nutrition director and is currently a professor of nutrition. And so we're always really grateful to her for being a sounding board and a professional, helpful perspective on school meals for us.